Across North America's wild hunting grounds, countless grizzly encounters have pushed even veteran hunters to their limits. Massive tracks in fresh snow, distant roars echoing through timber, and sudden charges remind everyone that these lands still belong to apex predators. Seasoned marksmen and first-time hunters alike have faced split seconds of life or death decisions, relying on skill, instinct, and sometimes pure luck to survive. In this video, you'll witness gripping ordeals, from the old rifle that toppled a legendary bear to a shocking last stand in the Rockies. In October 1987, the remote wilderness of Kodiak Island, Alaska, presented itself as one of the most challenging hunting grounds in North America. This colossal island, separated from the mainland by the turbulent waters of Shelikof Strait, had earned its reputation as home to the largest brown bears on the continent. The island's unique ecosystem, fed by abundant salmon runs and berry patches, had produced generations of enormous bears that could exceed 1,500 pounds. Local hunting guides often warned that Kodiak bears were not just larger than their mainland cousins, but also more aggressive and unpredictable due to the island's dense population and limited territory. Luke Jensen had arrived on the island 3 days earlier, carrying nothing but basic camping gear and his grandfather's Winchester Model 70, chambered in .375H and H Magnum. The rifle had belonged to his grandfather, Ezra Jensen, a legendary trapper who had worked the unforgiving terrain of the Yukon Territory during the 1950s. Ezra had relied on this particular rifle through countless encounters with dangerous game, and it had never failed him during his decades in the wilderness. The stock bore the smooth patina of thousands of miles carried through harsh conditions, and the bolt showed the slight stiffness that came with age. However, Luke had spent weeks meticulously cleaning every component, oiling the action, and testing its accuracy before his trip. Most experienced hunters had advised Luke against trusting such an old weapon in grizzly country, especially when hunting alone. Modern rifles with faster follow-up shots and more reliable mechanisms were readily available, but Luke felt a deep connection to the weathered Winchester. He believed that the rifle carried not just his grandfather's craftsmanship in maintaining it, but also decades of accumulated experience in life or death situations. On his fourth morning on Kodiak Island, Luke discovered fresh signs that made his pulse quicken. Near a protected cove on the island's eastern shore, he found the partially consumed remains of a harbor seal, its carcass still bleeding into the rocky shore. The gigantic paw prints surrounding the kill site measured nearly 12 inches across, indicating a bear of extraordinary size. The tracks led inland through dense alder thickets that grew so thick they formed natural tunnels, forcing Luke to crawl on his hands and knees as he followed the trail. As the October sun began its early descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape, Luke emerged from the thicket into a small clearing. The air hung heavy with the scent of fish, and something else that made his skin crawl with primitive warning signals. He had learned from his grandfather that experienced hunters developed an almost supernatural sense for danger, and every instinct Luke possessed was now screaming at him to retreat. The bear materialized from the shadows like something from a nightmare. It stood nearly 10 feet tall when it reared on its hind legs, its towering frame scarred from decades of territorial battles with other bears. Its coat was darker than most Kodiak bears, almost black in the fading light, and its eyes held an intelligence that Luke found deeply unsettling. The bear had clearly detected his presence long before he had spotted it, and its body language suggested it had already decided that Luke represented a threat to be eliminated. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. The bear dropped to all fours and launched itself across the clearing with surprising agility for such a colossal creature. Luke estimated later that the bear covered the 60 yards between them in less than 4 seconds, its powerful legs propelling its estimated 1,400-pound frame forward with unstoppable momentum. Luke raised the Winchester and fired his first shot when the bear was still 30 yards away. The heavy .375 H&H Magnum cartridge struck the bear in the chest, but the tremendous animal barely slowed its charge. Luke worked the bolt frantically, his hands moving with the muscle memory he had developed from countless hours of practicing with his grandfather's rifle. The bear closed to within 20 yards, then 15, its enormous head lowered and its small eyes locked on Luke with deadly intent. His second shot rang out when the bear was less than 10 yards away. This time, the old Winchester seemed to bark with extra authority, as if the rifle itself understood the desperate nature of the situation. The heavy bullet struck the bear just behind the shoulder, penetrating deep into its vital organs. The colossal creature stumbled, its charge finally broken, and crashed to the ground with an earth-shaking impact just 10 feet from where Luke stood frozen with his rifle still raised. For several minutes, Luke remained motionless, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. The bear lay motionless, its huge chest no longer rising and falling. But Luke had heard too many stories of wounded bears making final, fatal attacks to approach carelessly. Only after 15 minutes of observation did he cautiously move closer to confirm that the giant was truly dead. When Luke finally made it back to the small fishing village where he was staying, news of his kill spread quickly through the tight-knit community. Local guides and longtime residents gathered to examine the colossal bear, and several men who had spent their entire lives on Kodiak Island admitted they had never seen a larger specimen. When they managed to weigh the bear using a combination of scales and mathematical calculations, the final measurement exceeded 1,420 pounds, making it the largest grizzly bear ever recorded in that particular valley system. Luke later reflected that his grandfather Ezra would have been proud not just of the successful hunt, but of the fact that the old Winchester had performed flawlessly when everything depended on it. The rifle had proven that sometimes experience and reliability matter more than modern technology, especially when facing the raw power of Alaska's most dangerous predator. The pristine wilderness of the mountain region in northwestern Montana at the Crown Wilderness area had attracted wealthy hunters from across the United States for decades, particularly in September 1992. This particular area, nestled between towering peaks and dense pine forests, offered some of the finest elk hunting in North America. The terrain featured expansive meadows where enormous bull elk would graze during early morning and late evening hours, surrounded by thick timber that provided perfect cover for stalking. Local outfitters had established luxury hunting lodges that catered to clients willing to pay premium prices for guided hunts, custom equipment, and accommodations that rivaled five-star hotels. The exclusive hunting lodge where 4 seasoned hunters had gathered that September spared no expense in providing comfort and professional guidance. The main building featured hand-hewn log construction, stone fireplaces, and dining facilities that served gourmet meals prepared by trained chefs. Guest cabins featured private bathrooms, heated floors, and panoramic windows that overlooked the surrounding mountains. The lodge's stable housed well-trained horses specifically selected for packing gear across rugged terrain. At the same time, the equipment room contained an arsenal of custom rifles, high-end optics, and specialized hunting gear. Tom Bradshaw served as the lead guide for this particular hunt, bringing 15 years of experience guiding clients through Montana's challenging backcountry. Tom had earned his reputation not just for his ability to locate trophy animals, but also for his skill in managing dangerous situations that could arise when dealing with large game animals. He carried a custom .300 Winchester Magnum rifle that he had personally modified for maximum accuracy and reliability. His knowledge of elk behavior patterns was considered unmatched in the region. The 4 hunters who had joined this expedition represented different backgrounds but shared a common passion for pursuing trophy elk. 3 of the hunters were experienced sportsmen who had traveled extensively in pursuit of big game, while Jake Morrison, the 4th member of the group, was participating in his first guided elk hunt, despite having years of experience hunting white-tailed deer in his home state. On the 3rd day of their hunt, the group established camp in a high meadow that offered a commanding view of the surrounding valleys. Tom had selected this location based on fresh elk sign and his knowledge of traditional migration patterns. The morning had begun with thick fog that gradually lifted to reveal perfect hunting conditions, with minimal wind and comfortable temperatures that would keep the elk active throughout the day. Late in the afternoon, Tom spotted movement on a distant ridge approximately 500 yards from their position. Through his high-powered spotting scope, he identified a tremendous bull elk with an impressive rack that would easily qualify for record book consideration. The animal stood silhouetted against the sky, completely unaware of the hunters watching from below. Tom immediately began setting up shooting positions for his clients using his custom .300 Winchester Magnum rifles equipped with precision scopes. The distance and gusty wind conditions that had developed during the afternoon would make this an extremely challenging shot, even for experienced marksmen. Tom carefully calculated wind speed and direction while positioning the first 2 hunters for their attempts. The first hunter took his time lining up the shot, but when he squeezed the trigger, the bullet sailed wide of the target due to an unexpected wind gust. The colossal bull elk startled at the sound but did not immediately flee, instead moving nervously along the ridge while trying to locate the source of the disturbance. The second hunter fired moments later, but his shot also missed the mark, striking the rock several feet below the elk. Jake Morrison found himself in the position of taking the final shot before the elk would certainly disappear into the timber. His heart pounded against his ribs as Tom coached him through the sight picture and breathing technique. Jake had never attempted a shot at such extreme range, and the pressure of being the group's last hope weighed heavily on his mind. When Jake finally squeezed the trigger, the rifle recoiled against his shoulder with authority. Through the scope, he watched the gigantic bull elk stumble and then begin a headlong charge down the steep slope directly toward their camp. What had seemed like a successful conclusion to their hunt suddenly transformed into a potentially deadly situation. The wounded elk crashed through the timber with surprising speed, its enormous antlers sweeping aside branches and small trees. Chaos erupted in the hunting camp as horses bolted from their picket lines, scattering gear and supplies across the meadow. Tom shouted commands to his clients while trying to position himself for a follow-up shot that would stop the charging elk before it reached their location. The bull elk smashed through a temporary fence that had been erected to contain their horses, sending poles and wire flying in all directions. Hunters dove for cover behind trees and rocks as the colossal animal thundered past their position, missing Jake by less than 20 feet. Only when Tom managed to deliver a perfectly placed second shot did the elk finally crash to the ground and remain motionless. In the aftermath of the encounter, The luxury accommodations and carefully planned hunt seemed insignificant compared to the raw power and unpredictability they had just witnessed. Jake later admitted that the experience had taught him profound respect for both the animals they pursued and the unforgiving nature of the wilderness, regardless of how much money had been spent to make the hunt comfortable and safe. The dense spruce forests of central Maine during early September 1995 represented some of the most challenging black bear hunting terrain in the northeastern United States. This remote wilderness area, characterized by thick stands of evergreen trees interspersed with small clearings and seasonal berry patches, had supported healthy black bear populations for generations. The forest complex ecosystem provided abundant food sources, including wild berries, nuts, and small game, while the dense canopy offered bears excellent protection from human intrusion. Local wildlife biologists estimated that this particular region supported one of the highest black bear densities in Maine, making it both an attractive hunting destination and a potentially dangerous environment for inexperienced hunters. Mark Patterson had been planning this hunting trip with his 16-year-old son Luke Patterson for over a year. Mark brought decades of hunting experience to the expedition, having pursued various game species throughout New England since his teenage years. He carried a reliable Ruger American rifle chambered in .30-06 Springfield, a cartridge he had used successfully on everything from white-tailed deer to moose. Mark understood that black bears, despite being smaller than their western cousins, could be extremely dangerous when protecting cubs or defending territory. Luke Patterson was participating in his first official hunting season after completing Maine's mandatory hunter safety course and practicing extensively at local shooting ranges. His father had purchased him a lightweight .243 Winchester rifle, specifically chosen for its manageable recoil and accuracy. While Luke had demonstrated excellent marksmanship skills during practice sessions, Mark recognized that shooting at paper targets differed dramatically from facing live game animals in high-stress situations. The father and son team had been hunting for 3 days without encountering any bears, despite finding abundant sign, including claw marks on trees, overturned logs, and fresh scat. On their fourth morning, they decided to explore a remote section of forest where local guides had reported recent bear activity. The area featured several natural clearings where wild blueberries grew in abundance, creating ideal feeding locations for bears as they prepared for winter hibernation. As they approached one of these clearings around mid-morning, Mark spotted movement through the trees approximately 60 yards ahead of their position. Using hand signals to communicate with his son, Mark indicated they should stop and observe the situation before proceeding. Through his binoculars, Mark identified a medium-sized female black bear accompanied by 2 cubs, all 3 animals actively feeding on ripe berries. Mark whispered instructions to Luke about proper shooting technique and stressed the importance of remaining calm under pressure. He explained that female bears with cubs represented the most dangerous encounters hunters could face, as mother bears would aggressively defend their offspring against any perceived threat. Mark positioned himself slightly behind and to the side of Luke, ready to provide backup if the situation deteriorated. Luke raised his .243 Winchester and attempted to steady his breathing while acquiring a clear sight picture of the female bear. His father had taught him to wait for the perfect broadside shot that would ensure a quick, humane harvest of the animal. However, as Luke prepared to squeeze the trigger, the situation changed dramatically. The female bear suddenly raised her head and looked directly toward their position, apparently having detected their scent or heard some subtle noise that revealed their presence. For several seconds, the bear remained motionless while assessing the potential threat. Then, without warning, she issued a loud huffing sound and charged directly toward Luke's position. Black bears can reach speeds of 30 miles per hour over short distances, and this particular female covered the 60 yards between them with frightening speed. Luke froze completely as the large animal thundered toward him. Her lips pulled back to reveal impressive canine teeth, and her small eyes locked on him with unmistakable hostile intent. Mark reacted instantly, raising his Ruger American and firing 2 rapid shots at the charging bear. His first shot struck the animal's shoulder, causing her to stumble but not stopping her forward momentum. The second shot hit center mass, finally bringing the bear down just 8 feet from where Luke stood, paralyzed with fear. In the immediate aftermath of the encounter, Luke stumbled backward and sat down heavily on a fallen log, his entire body shaking from adrenaline and shock. Mark quickly moved to his son's side while keeping his rifle trained on the motionless bear, knowing that wounded bears sometimes made final aggressive attempts before succumbing to their injuries. Mark pulled Luke close and spoke quietly to him about the importance of staying calm during dangerous situations. He explained that freezing under pressure was a natural human response, but that successful hunters learn to control their fear and react appropriately when facing dangerous game. Mark also emphasized that hunting with a partner provided crucial backup when situations went wrong, and that Luke should never attempt to hunt dangerous game alone until he gained much more experience. The encounter served as a harsh introduction to the realities of hunting dangerous game for Luke Patterson. While he had successfully completed hunter safety courses and demonstrated excellent shooting skills, nothing had prepared him for the terror of facing a charging bear. Mark later reflected that the experience, while frightening, had taught his son valuable lessons about respecting wild animals and understanding that hunting involved genuine risks that required constant vigilance and quick decision-making abilities. The vast interior wilderness of Alaska during late November 1989 presented some of the most unforgiving hunting conditions in North America. This remote region, located hundreds of miles from the nearest settlement, featured endless expanses of tundra broken by scattered stands of stunted spruce trees and numerous small lakes that froze solid by early winter. The area served as critical habitat for large caribou herds that migrated through the region during autumn months, but the same isolation that made it attractive to caribou also made it extremely dangerous for hunters caught unprepared by Alaska's notoriously unpredictable weather patterns. Sarah Hendricks and her hunting partner Mike Coleman had traveled to this remote location specifically to pursue caribou during the final weeks of the season. Sarah brought considerable experience hunting in challenging conditions, having spent years pursuing various game species throughout the western United States. Mike Coleman possessed even more extensive wilderness experience, including several seasons guiding hunters through Alaska's backcountry. Both hunters understood the risks involved in hunting such remote terrain, but they had prepared extensively with quality cold weather gear, emergency supplies, and satellite communication equipment. Their hunting camp was located approximately 15 miles from the nearest access road, requiring them to pack all their equipment using four-wheelers and then on foot for the final several miles. The area they had selected for their hunt featured a natural funnel between two ridges where caribou traditionally passed during their southern migration. Local guides had recommended this location based on historical success rates and the likelihood of encountering large bulls with impressive antler spreads. The weather had remained relatively stable during their first 3 days in the field, with temperatures hovering around 20 degrees Fahrenheit and light winds that made hunting comfortable despite the cold conditions. Sarah and Mike had observed several small groups of caribou, but none included the trophy-class bulls they hoped to harvest. On their fourth morning, they decided to explore terrain several miles from their base camp, following fresh tracks that suggested a large herd had passed through the area recently. Around noon, they noticed dramatic changes in atmospheric conditions that suggested deteriorating weather. The temperature began dropping rapidly, while winds increased significantly, and thick clouds moved in from the west with alarming speed. Mike recognized these signs as indicators of an approaching storm system and recommended they begin returning to their camp immediately. However, before they could reach safety, the storm struck with devastating intensity. Visibility dropped to less than 10 feet as heavy snow began falling horizontally across the landscape, driven by winds that exceeded 50 miles per hour. The temperature plummeted to minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, creating life-threatening wind chill conditions that could cause frostbite within minutes of exposure. Sarah and Mike found themselves completely disoriented in the whiteout conditions, unable to identify familiar landmarks or maintain their intended direction of travel. Their GPS unit lost satellite signal due to the heavy cloud cover, leaving them without reliable navigation assistance. After struggling through knee-deep snow for several hours, both hunters realized they were facing a genuine survival emergency. Hypothermia became an immediate concern as their body temperatures began to drop, despite wearing high-quality, cold-weather clothing. Mike noticed that Sarah was beginning to show early signs of hypothermia, including confusion and loss of coordination. He understood that they needed to find shelter immediately or risk freezing to death in the storm. Through the swirling snow, they spotted the dim outline of a small log cabin partially buried under snowdrifts. The structure appeared to be an old trapper's cabin constructed from local timber and designed to withstand harsh winter conditions. When they reached the building, they discovered that the door was secured with a heavy padlock, but Mike managed to break a window and gain entry to the interior. The cabin's interior was sparse but functional, containing basic furniture, a wood-burning stove, and shelves lined with canned goods that appeared to be several years old. Most importantly, they found a substantial supply of split firewood that would allow them to heat the cabin and survive the storm. Mike immediately began building a fire while Sarah examined their surroundings more carefully. On a rough wooden table, Sarah discovered a hunting journal that had been left open to entries dated 2 years earlier. The handwriting belonged to someone who had used the cabin as a base for running trap lines throughout the surrounding area. The entries described daily activities, weather conditions, and observations about local wildlife populations. However, the final entry ended abruptly mid-sentence with no explanation for why the author had stopped writing. Throughout the night, strange noises from outside the cabin kept both Sarah and Mike alert and nervous. They heard sounds that could have been shifting snow sliding off the roof or possibly large animals moving around the building. Occasionally, they detected what sounded like distant howling, though they could not determine whether the sounds came from wolves or simply wind passing through the trees. When morning arrived and the storm finally cleared, Sarah and Mike packed their gear and prepared to leave the cabin. They left money on the table to compensate the owner for the supplies they had consumed and the window they had broken. However, both hunters felt deeply unsettled by their experience in the mysterious cabin, particularly the abruptly ended journal entries and the strange noises they had heard during the night. The experience taught them that Alaska's wilderness could transform from manageable to life-threatening within hours, and that survival often depended on luck as much as preparation and skill. The dense willow swamps of interior Alaska during late September 2001 represented some of the most challenging and dangerous hunting terrain in North America. This particular region, characterized by vast wetlands interspersed with thick stands of willow trees that could grow over 15 feet tall, served as prime habitat for Alaska's colossal bull moose. The swampy conditions made travel extremely difficult, requiring hunters to wade through knee-deep water and mud while navigating through vegetation so thick that visibility rarely extended beyond 20 yards. Local wildlife biologists estimated that mature bull moose in this area could exceed 1,500 pounds and carry antler spreads measuring over 60 inches across. Dave Thornton had been planning this solo moose hunt for over 2 years, studying topographical maps and consulting with local guides about the best locations and techniques for pursuing trophy bulls. Dave brought extensive hunting experience from pursuing various big game species throughout the western United States, but he understood that hunting Alaska moose required specialized knowledge and equipment. He carried a .338 Winchester Magnum rifle, specifically chosen for its ability to deliver the heavy, high-velocity bullets necessary to stop such enormous animals quickly and humanely. The area where Dave had established his hunting camp featured a natural confluence of several small streams, creating extensive wetlands surrounded by prime moose habitat. September represented the peak of the moose rutting season, when tremendous bulls became extremely aggressive and unpredictable while competing for breeding opportunities with females. Dave had timed his hunt to coincide with this period because rutting bulls were more likely to respond to calling techniques and less likely to retreat when approached by hunters. On his third day in the field, Dave had been working his way through a particularly dense section of willow swamp when he heard the unmistakable sound of a large animal feeding nearby. Moose feeding sounds were distinctive, involving the breaking of branches and the rhythmic munching of vegetation that could be heard from considerable distances. Dave immediately stopped his movement and began stalking toward the source of the noise. Moving through the thick willows required extreme care to avoid making sounds that would alert the moose to his presence. Dave had learned that bull moose possessed excellent hearing and would quickly disappear into the swamp if they detected any unusual disturbance. He spent nearly 30 minutes covering the final 50 yards to where he could observe the feeding moose through small openings in the vegetation. When Dave finally obtained a clear view of the animal, he realized he was looking at one of the largest bull moose he had ever encountered. The gigantic animal stood approximately 6.5 feet tall at the shoulder and displayed an impressive set of antlers that spread well over 5 feet across. The bull was actively feeding on willow branches, completely unaware of Dave's presence 80 yards away. Dave carefully positioned himself for a clear shot, using his .338 Winchester Magnum, equipped with a high-quality scope designed for low-light conditions. He had practiced extensively with this particular rifle. He felt confident in his ability to place the first shot precisely where it would cause immediate incapacitation of such a large animal. Dave understood that wounded moose could be extremely dangerous, and that proper shot placement was critical for both hunter safety and ethical harvesting. His first shot struck the bull moose exactly where he had aimed, hitting the animal behind the shoulder in an area that should have damaged vital organs and caused rapid death. However, instead of collapsing as Dave expected, the colossal bull exploded into a rage-fueled charge directly toward his position. Dave had read about such reactions from wounded moose, but had never personally witnessed the incredible speed and aggression that these animals could display when injured. The bull crashed through the thick willow vegetation with surprising agility for such a tremendous creature, its enormous antlers sweeping aside branches and small trees as it closed the distance between them. Dave barely had time to work the bolt of his rifle and chamber a second cartridge before the enraged moose reached his location. The animal's huge antlers, measuring over 5 feet across, swung toward Dave with enough force to cause fatal injuries. One of the antler tines grazed Dave's left thigh, tearing through his heavy hunting pants and leaving a painful but not serious wound. The close encounter with those towering antlers made Dave realize how quickly the situation had escalated from a routine hunting shot to a potentially deadly confrontation. Adrenaline surged through his system as he managed to fire his second shot at point-blank range. This second shot struck the bull moose in the shoulder area, causing the animal to veer away from Dave's position rather than continuing its aggressive attack. The wounded bull crashed deeper into the swamp where Dave could hear it thrashing through the vegetation for several minutes before the sounds gradually ceased. Dave remained motionless for over 10 minutes, allowing his heart rate to return to normal while listening for any indication that the moose might still be alive and potentially pose a danger. When Dave finally approached the location where the bull had fallen, he found the colossal animal had died from the combination of his 2 shots. However, the experience had provided him with a sobering reminder about the unpredictable nature of hunting such large and powerful animals. Dave later reflected that even with proper equipment and careful shot placement, hunters could never completely eliminate the element of danger when pursuing game animals capable of inflicting serious or fatal injuries. The encounter reinforced Dave's respect for Alaska's wildlife and reminded him that successful hunting required not just marksmanship skills, but also the ability to react quickly and effectively when situations developed in unexpected ways. The rugged terrain of Montana's Rocky Mountain front during early October 1998 represented some of the most pristine grizzly bear habitat remaining in the lower 48 states. This remote wilderness area where the Great Plains met the towering peaks of the Continental Divide provided ideal conditions for North America's most dangerous predator. The region featured dense forests of lodgepole pine and Douglas fir, interspersed with alpine meadows and rocky outcroppings that offered grizzly bears abundant food sources and excellent denning sites. Local wildlife biologists estimated that this particular area supported one of the healthiest grizzly populations in Montana, with individual bears reaching weights exceeding 800 pounds. Sean McCullough had obtained one of the limited grizzly bear hunting permits issued by Montana's Wildlife Department, a license that required years of applications through the state's lottery system. Sean understood that grizzly hunting represented the ultimate test of a hunter's skill and courage, as these colossal predators possess the intelligence, strength, and aggression to turn hunter into prey within seconds. He carried a .300 Winchester Magnum rifle loaded with premium-controlled expansion bullets specifically designed for dangerous game hunting. The area where Sean had chosen to hunt was known locally for its unpredictable weather patterns and challenging terrain that could test even experienced mountaineers. October weather in this region could range from pleasant autumn conditions to life-threatening blizzards within hours, and hunters needed to be prepared for extreme temperature variations and sudden storms. Sean had equipped himself with quality cold weather gear and emergency supplies, but he understood that self-reliance and quick decision-making would be his most important survival tools. On his 4th day in the field, Sean had been working his way along a high ridge that offered commanding views of the surrounding valleys. The wind in this exposed location seemed to carry an almost supernatural awareness of danger, constantly shifting direction and intensity in ways that made Sean feel as though unseen eyes were watching him. Experienced grizzly hunters often reported similar sensations when hunting in prime bear habitat, as though the presence of such powerful predators created an atmosphere of heightened tension. Around mid-morning, Sean spotted movement in a small clearing approximately 80 yards below his position. Through his binoculars, he identified a large male grizzly bear feeding on the carcass of an elk that had apparently been killed several days earlier. The bear was enormous even by grizzly standards, with a distinctive silver-tipped coat and a broad head that indicated exceptional maturity and strength. Sean carefully positioned himself for a clear shot, using natural rock formations to steady his rifle while maintaining concealment from the feeding bear. He understood that grizzly bears possessed excellent senses of smell and hearing, making it critical to remain downwind and avoid any unnecessary movement or noise. Sean had practiced extensively with his .300 Winchester Magnum and felt confident in his ability to place a precise shot at the 80-yard distance. However, as Sean prepared to squeeze the trigger, the gigantic grizzly suddenly raised its head and looked directly toward his position. For several long seconds, predator and hunter stared at each other across the rocky terrain, each assessing the threat presented by the other. Then, without any warning signs or defensive posturing, the bear launched itself into a full-speed charge up the steep slope toward Sean's location. Grizzly bears can reach speeds of 35 miles per hour even when running uphill, and this particular male covered the 80 yards between them with terrifying efficiency. Sean fired his first shot when the bear was still 50 yards away, but the bullet missed its target completely due to his elevated heart rate and the bear's rapid movement across uneven terrain. Sean worked the bolt of his rifle frantically and fired again when the bear had closed to within 30 yards. This shot struck the charging grizzly too far back in the abdomen, causing significant internal damage but failing to stop the animal's aggressive advance. Wounded grizzly bears often become even more dangerous and determined in their attacks, and this colossal male showed no signs of slowing despite its injury. At 15 yards, the charging bear slammed into Sean with the force of a small automobile, knocking his rifle from his hands and sending him sprawling across the rocky ground. The collision caused serious injuries, and the bear's claws raked across his shoulder, inflicting deep wounds that began bleeding heavily. Sean later described the bear's strength as being almost beyond human comprehension, like being attacked by a living bulldozer. In the moments following the initial impact, Sean managed to draw his sidearm and fire 2 shots into the bear's chest at point-blank range. The combination of his rifle shot and the 2 pistol shots finally proved sufficient to stop the enormous grizzly, which staggered several yards before collapsing in a pile of rocks and sparse vegetation. Sean struggled to his feet and began assessing his injuries while keeping his pistol trained on the motionless bear. His shoulder had sustained severe damage from the bear's claws, with deep lacerations that required urgent medical attention to prevent excessive blood loss. Using his emergency first aid supplies, Sean managed to control the bleeding sufficiently to allow him to travel to his ATV. The ride back to civilization proved to be an ordeal almost as challenging as the bear encounter itself, as Sean had to navigate rough terrain while dealing with significant pain and blood loss from his injuries. He eventually reached a point where his satellite communication device could contact emergency services, and a helicopter evacuation team transported him to a trauma center for emergency surgery. The helicopter evacuation proved to be a complex operation due to the remote location and deteriorating weather conditions. The rescue crew had to navigate through mountain valleys while dealing with strong crosswinds and low-hanging clouds that made landing extremely hazardous. The pilot, Captain Robert Martinez, possessed decades of experience conducting mountain rescues and understood the critical nature of Sean's injuries based on the initial radio communication from ground personnel. During the flight to the trauma center, Sean remained conscious despite considerable blood loss and shock from his encounter with the Grizzly. The flight medic, Lisa Chen, worked steadily to stabilize his condition while monitoring his vital signs and administering emergency care. She later reported that Sean's injuries were among the most serious bear attack wounds she had encountered during her 8 years of emergency medical service in Montana. The surgical procedure required several hours to complete, with a team of specialists working to repair the damage caused by the bear's claws. Dr. Amanda Foster, the lead surgeon, explained that the attack had caused significant damage to muscle tissue and bone structure in Sean's shoulder region. The surgical team worked carefully to clean and treat the wounds while addressing the complications from the encounter. Sean's recovery process extended over several months and included extensive physical therapy to restore the full range of motion to his injured shoulder. The medical implant that surgeons placed to repair his shoulder blade became a permanent part of his anatomy, setting off metal detectors and serving as a constant reminder of his close encounter with one of North America's most dangerous predators. During his rehabilitation, Sean often reflected on the factors that had contributed to both his survival and his injuries. He recognized that his decision to hunt alone in prime grizzly habitat had increased his risk significantly, as having a hunting partner might have provided crucial backup during the encounter. Sean also acknowledged that his first shot placement had been critical to the outcome, as a more accurate initial shot might have prevented the bear's charge entirely. The experience fundamentally changed Sean's approach to hunting dangerous game animals. He became an advocate for proper preparation, quality equipment, and respect for the animals that hunters pursued. Sean frequently spoke to hunting groups about the importance of understanding that wild animals, particularly large predators, possess the ability to turn any hunting situation into a life-threatening encounter within seconds. The physical scars served as permanent reminders that even well-armed and experienced hunters were not always the apex predator when facing North America's most dangerous game animals in their natural habitat.